Hello everyone and welcome back to the Football Forecast, where in today's video I'm going to be ranking every Premier League team season so far from A to E. I'm going to be taking into account obviously the club's expectations, how they performed, but also what their results are. So it's going to be a mixture, not just results based. Let me know your thoughts on this video. If you enjoy it, it'd be great if you could head over to the YouTube channel and subscribe. So we're going to start off with Bournemouth. If you enjoy this video, it'd be great if you could head over to the YouTube channel and subscribe. And Bournemouth have made a pretty good start to the season, I think it's fair to say. In fact, not pretty good, a brilliant start to the season. They're currently in 4th place and look like a side that could definitely even compete for Europe. Considering they lost Zabaini, Kirkes, Huijsen, this is completely exceeding expectations. But we're starting to get used to this as Bournemouth as a club. It's so impressive how they do this. They continue to sort of overachieve, despite being a club that's got a very small fan base, small ground, not a lot of revenue. They find ways, and that is what's so impressive about Bournemouth. If you look at their fixtures so far, you can clearly see how impressive Bournemouth have been. They've lost only one game, and that was to Liverpool on the first day. I thought they gave up a really valiant effort, and Antoine Semenyo was brilliant that day. But apart from that, a 1-0 win against Wolves where they played well, a 1-0 win away at Spurs where they played well, a win against Brighton, a draw against Newcastle, a draw away at Leeds, a win against Fulham. These are all very good results in general, and their performance is so good. And I think it's so harsh to give them anything more than an A, because I think their performance is worthy of an A, and I definitely think their results are worthy of an A. Being in Champions League football for Bournemouth is absolutely brilliant for them as a football club, and for that reason they're going straight in A. So on to Arsenal, and Arsenal so far have made a largely impressive start to the season. They're obviously top of the league. Their performances in some games I think could have been better, and for clubs like this I am going to take their Champions League games into account and their European games because I think it's worth discussing it, as well as maybe cups if I feel like it's a competition they should be taking seriously or they've gone out in a bad way. So starting off with Arsenal, and look, Man United absolutely could have got something from that game, I think it's fair to say. Where Arsenal have been impressive though is against these sort of lower sides, these sides at home, the Leeds Uniteds of the world, the Nottingham Foresters of the world, the West Hams, and that's where I think Arsenal have been at their best so far this season. And look, that was some trouble for them last year, those sort of sides at home, but I think that's where I think you've got to say Arsenal have done really well. They've absolutely met expectations, getting all their points they needed from those games, and they got the win away at Manchester United. Where have they struggled though? Obviously they got that 1-1 draw with Manchester City, and the 1-0 loss to Liverpool is a concern in terms of, I think, performance and results, as Arsenal should be winning these games, or should be getting something from these games, I think, at this stage. I think if you look at the Liverpool game, they should be getting a minimum of a draw. If you look at the City game, they should have won that game. They were the better side, and you could argue they're the better side for the Liverpool game. Arsenal's squad, I think it's fair to say, is right up there with the very best now. Then you look at the Newcastle game, and I think this is where Arsenal earn all that back. That was such a good 3 points. It was a great performance, and that, for me, actually puts Arsenal into A. I think that performance was brilliant, and I think that probably moves it up to probably a B+. And I think the results, I think you can't not put results in A, and that is purely off the fact that Arsenal are top of the league, and they're arguably, well, they are proven to be the best side in the league so far this season. On to Aston Villa, and I don't think this is a side we're going to be talking sort of about the higher tiers, definitely not on the A tiers like Bournemouth and Arsenal, and that's mainly because of their start of the season. If you look at these results, the performances were also crap for all these games, especially that 3-0 loss to Palace, the 1-0 loss to Brentford, the nil-alls with Villa, with Everton and Newcastle, and they just couldn't win a game of football as well as scoring. Even the Sunderland game, when Sunderland had 10 men, they couldn't find a way to break through. So where have they actually saved their season? Where's the positives? The last couple of games. The European games aren't here, but they won their 2 Europa League games against Feyenoord and Bologna, and they won their last 2 Premier League games. For me, those performances were a lot better. The Feyenoord and the Bologna games still are warranted on performances, and to be honest, for performances, I've still got it in E. I don't think they've shown enough. I think they've shown some fight, but I don't think they've shown enough to sort of justify after the first sort of 5-6 games, which were absolutely crap for Aston Villa. But where have they saved it a bit? I think the results. I think the fact that they're doing well in the Europa League, and Villa salvaged the 13th place in the Premier League, and for that reason I think I can be generous to them and give them a D-, but they're very much on the lower side of D. It was very close to E, and they've only really performed in the last sort of week. So then we've got Burnley. Burnley are currently lying in 18th place in the Premier League. Not really where I think they will feel like they need to be this season, but in some ways, I think this isn't as bad as people are making out. This is sort of where I had Burnley. In fact, I had them in 20th. So in my eyes, they've kept themselves in the relegation fight. They picked up a win and a couple of draws, and that sort of kept Burnley, I think, where they could sort of say, you know what, we're still in it. And I think if from a Burnley perspective, that is good enough for the rest of the season. If you're still in it by the end, you're always in a chance, and I think that's how Burnley need to take and believe that they can win, or believe they can get out of the relegation zone this season. They're not going to be a side like Sunderland who's going to fly out. And look, they have won a game. They won against Sunderland and they got a draw against Nottingham Forest. The rest of the results, not great. I think they can take a lot of performance-based reward from the Manchester United and the Liverpool game, where I think they really deserved, 2 points on both games. They played well in those games, they fought hard, and that's at the end of the day what you want from those sort of sides: fight, grit, and that's what I think they gave, determination. So I think for Burnley, you can actually give them a bit of praise, but they're still nowhere near sort of a C. A C is meeting expectations, and Burnley are currently in the relegation scrap, so this is definitely still a D for Burnley. So then on to Brentford, and I think Brentford can be pretty happy with their season so far. If you look at this season from Brentford, their home form is completely different to their away form. At home, they've actually played very well. They picked up 7 points from 4 games. Away, they've had troubles not picking up a single point. And considering they've lost Norgard, Wissa, and Mbeumo, I think they can overall say, look, we've done a decent job. Where have they lacked, though? They've lost to Sunderland. They've lost to Fulham away. Those are probably 2 games they would have looked at potential points. And considering Forest have only picked up 1 win this season, I think maybe you look at Nottingham Forest and say, could have we taken something at the City ground? But I think in general, Brentford can be happy because of their wins against United, their wins against Villa, their draw against Chelsea. And look, they're just meeting expectations in my eyes. They're in 16th place. If they finish 16th, it's another year in the Premier League. And I think that's just what Brentford need right now. I don't think Brentford are ever going to be able to push any further than this. For that reason, I'm just going to put them in a C. I think their performance warrants a C, and so do I think their results. So then we're on to Brighton, and this has to be the most Brighton result, a mixed bag. That's what you get from Brighton, it feels like right now. They don't quite got the consistent form they need to sort of push any further, and I think they've just won games which you wouldn't expect them to win, and then drop points in games that they should have won. If you look at these results so far, I think you go, Fulham, they should have won. Everton, they should have taken something. But then you wouldn't have expected to get anything against City. I know you can say, oh, I think that might happen. But in general, probably won't expect much against City. Bournemouth, Brighton, I think you could have said Brighton should get something from that. Brighton, Spurs, I think you could argue that they shouldn't have got anything. Chelsea away, you would have said they shouldn't have got anything. And Wolves. So if you look at this, they've actually probably broken even. Because in all the games you would have gone, they should have won. They haven't, but then they've won in other games. In all the games you've gone, that's a loss. That's probably only a draw. They've managed to find a way to get the result. So for that reason, I think you've got to give Brighton a C, because they've had real mixed bag, and that's what a C is. I do think Brighton can improve though, because if they keep playing well against these sort of lower sides, they can definitely jump into European places. So on to Chelsea, and I've been critical of Chelsea this season, but that's mainly been off the pitch stuff around their transfer business, not signing a centre-half, and now they're down to fullbacks at centre-half, not signing, in my opinion, a world-class left winger, which is what they needed, not Garnacho and Gittins, and so that's how I'm going to rank this. I'm not going to rank them about their signings, I'm going to rank them around what I think Maresca's done with what he's been given, and how the players have performed for Chelsea, and that's going to be for every team like this. So Chelsea so far have had a decent season. They drew with Crystal Palace, probably quite a good result now. Lost one against West Ham and one against Fulham. I'd say it's a very good start. Now it goes downhill. They drew to Brentford, and they lost to United, and they lost to Brighton. I'd say it's 3 poor results. Where they've saved it though is the game against Liverpool. They were obviously winning against Liverpool despite having a right back and a left back, and I think they showed great fight in that game. For me, that moves their rating up a lot. In the Champions League, they lost to Bayern, which I think you can understand. They won against Benfica, and then they won against Lincoln. For me, that sort of moves them. For me, that's probably overall a negative, but I still think they're just good enough for a C. I think there's an argument for a D, because Chelsea would have expected to be more in the title race, and they're currently in 8th and appear to sort of be out of it. So for this reason, I don't think you can give a really high rating for Chelsea, but I think they can have a C. I think off performance, it's probably a C. Oh, and off where they'd like to be, I think on results, I'd probably give it a D. I don't think it's quite where Chelsea need to be so far this season. Then on to Crystal Palace, who have made a very good start to their season so far. And look, the fixtures do reflect this. I actually think that some people maybe thought Palace have had a slightly better season because they've won 3, drawn 3, and lost 1 game. But I do think the performances have been right up there, and they've got some very good wins. A win against Liverpool, a win against Villa away from home, and then they've got a draw against Chelsea. A draw against Forest probably isn't great, but that was still under Nuno. A draw against Sunderland, but they played well. A win away at West Ham, which most teams are going to be getting this season, it appears right now. And then a 2-1 loss to Everton. I think results, you're looking at a B plus to a A minus because they're currently in 6th. I think this is way higher than Palace would have expected to be. I think on performance, you're also looking at least, I think you're looking at a very high A for Crystal Palace because I think they're performing so well. They're competing in every game and they look like such a dangerous threat. If you look at that Liverpool game, they battered Liverpool in that game. They could have won that game 5 or 6-0. And if Alisson didn't play, you would have thought that you would have thought that Crystal Palace could have won by 4 or 5 goals. And I am going to put them in A for this reason. Then on to Crystal Palace, who have made a very good start to their season so far. And look, the fixtures do reflect this. I actually think that some people maybe thought Palace have had a slightly better season because they've won 3, drawn 3, and lost 1 game. But I do think the performances have been right up there, and they've got some very good wins. A win against Liverpool, a win against Villa away from home, and then they've got a draw against Chelsea. A draw against Forest probably isn't great, but that was still under Nuno. A draw against Sunderland, but they played well. A win away at West Ham, which most teams are going to be getting this season, it appears right now. And then a 2-1 loss to Everton. I think results, you're looking at a B plus to a A minus because they're currently in 6th. I think this is way higher than Palace would have expected to be. I think on performance, you're also looking at least, I think you're looking at a very high A for Crystal Palace because I think they're performing so well. They're competing in every game and they look like such a dangerous threat. If you look at that Liverpool game, they battered Liverpool in that game. They could have won that game 5 or 6-0. And if Alisson didn't play, you would have thought that you would have thought that Crystal Palace could have won by 4 or 5 goals. And I am going to put them in A for this reason. So then on to Everton. I think Everton have had a pretty good season so far. Sort of just doing what I expect them to do. I had Everton finishing in 8th place. I think they're a very good side. They're just going to go under the radar. And I really like the signings of Grealish and Njai. And what they just lack is a striker. And a lot of these results do prove this. So straight away, they didn't start off the season well with that loss away at Leeds. And I thought Beto was so poor in that game. But then they got 2 very good wins. They should have won against Villa. At Liverpool, I think they performed all right, but I'm probably saying this is a bad performance, and the people disagree. And this is purely off the fact that I think Everton, the only reason they sort of came back in that game is because Liverpool really stepped off the gas and they weren't playing to the level they should have. It was a real poor second half from Liverpool, not the Liverpool, and that was sort of Liverpool's last sort of signs that this was going to happen, that Liverpool eventually going to start losing games. So I didn't think it was Everton playing well particularly. I thought it was Liverpool playing poorly. Then Everton, West Ham ended a draw, and then they had won in their game against Crystal Palace. So if you look at this, I think you go, where have they missed out on points? They probably missed out on, I'd say, 5 points against West Ham and Leeds, but I think they've gained points against Crystal Palace. They've gained points against Brighton at home. They've showed good accounts in other games as well. So I think off sort of results, I think they've sort of done very well. They're at 8th place. This is higher than most people thought. This is where I had them, and I'm going to give them a C. Then that's purely because I think that they've had a reasonably easy start. A lot of home games in there, and against teams that have been underperforming like Wolves and Villa. But for performance, I'm going to give Everton a B. I think their performance has been very good. They could have easily, as I said, probably had more points on the board. They probably deserve more points on the board, and I think Everton can be very happy so far. And overall, I'm actually giving them a B because I think they're probably more. They're probably more of a B. They're probably more of a B minus, I think, than a C plus for Everton. So on to Fulham, who have had a bit of a mixed start to the season, and this is the Fulham result so far. I think what you could say with Fulham is they've been rather unlucky, I think, with some VAR calls, especially in that Chelsea game, which they should have gone 1-0 up, and you never know, once they go 1-0 up, they could have easily won that game. Once again with Fulham, their home form is rather impressive. They picked up 7 points or a possible 9 at home. Their away form, I mean, hasn't been great. They have only picked up 1 point on the road. I think Fulham are just doing what Fulham do. They're just hanging around some mid-table. They're in 14th place, and I think their sort of performance warrants a C, and I think so does their results. I think this is sort of where Fulham expect to be. Maybe they should be slightly higher up the table, but I don't think it's enough where you would deduct them any further down. So for that reason, I'm going to move Fulham into C. On to Leeds, who I think have had a very good start to the Premier League this season. I think they've shown signs that they can stay up, and I think this is rather similar to Burnley. As long as they're showing decent signs they can stay up, and they're also outside the relegation zone, they're automatically looking at C and above, and I think Leeds have been impressive so far. You go through their games, Everton, they deserve that 3 points. Arsenal away, void it. It doesn't matter. That's just that. Leeds, Newcastle, Leeds did well to get a draw. Fulham away, they should have got something from that game, and they lost it in the last minute due to an own goal. Wolves away, they got 3 points. Leeds against Bournemouth, they should have got more from that. And Leeds Spurs, they were unlucky to lose to Spurs. They played very well in that game. So straight away, performance for Leeds, I'm going B. Results, I'm also going with a B. And that is because Leeds are comfortably above the relegation zone. They look like a side that can stay up. I think if Leeds finishing 15th at the end of the season with these sort of results, you would give it a B. But the reason performance is B is because Leeds are showing signs they can stay out. They're performing in those big games, especially those games at home, and that's the thing. They're looking like a side I think that can really cause sides some problems. And look, they look better than most relegation sides you would usually expect in the Premier, and that is something that's been so good about the Premier League this season. So I do actually have some confidence that Leeds can stay up, and for that reason, they are going to go into B. Right, on to my team, Liverpool. And if we were to do this based off the first 5 games of the season, results would be completely different. But now you look at this and you go, we haven't won every game, which would have been a top A. And now we've dropped 6 points after 7 games. And I'm going to move that down to a B. And maybe this is slightly biased, this B. I'm going to say a very low B. We've also lost to Galatasaray away. We won our first game in the Champions League, though. And I think the fact we're second, that can warrant a B. I think that's not too biased. Performance though, D. It's that simple. Performances are a D. There's an argument for E once again. Performances have been absolutely shocking. Nowhere near good enough recently especially. And they've declined after me saying basically we're going to have to get better at some point. And they've continued to decline. We haven't been at our best, I don't think, since the Arsenal game was probably one of our better performances. Or maybe that Everton first half. That's the only sort of good performances. And maybe Atletico Madrid. I think of the sort of 3 games you look at and go, Liverpool showed signs there of what they need to be. But the last couple of performances have been shocking. And finally, I feel like in some ways we've been punished for those poor results. This isn't what I wanted as a Liverpool fan, but I think it's what's deserved on what we've seen so far. So for that reason, Liverpool are going to be a C overall. Let me know if you agree with that. Do you think I've been biased? On to Manchester City, and it's a bit of a mixed bag for Manchester City, I think it's fair to say. They've had a decent start to the season, how I describe Manchester City, a bit similar to Liverpool in some ways. They've shown in some games, I think, better performances than Liverpool, though, I've got to admit. They look very good in their away win at Wolves, but then they struggled against Spurs, they struggled against Brighton, they then played well against United, then they struggled against Arsenal, and then they finished with 2 decent results. And I think City deserve more marks for performance in the Champions League. They've also won against Napoli, drawing to Monaco. So for performance for City, I'm going to give a C. Right, Manchester United. Now this is an interesting case, isn't it? Because United have had some decent results, but in general they haven't had the season that I think a lot of United fans were looking for. And I think where they're going to run into issues in terms of results and performance is Ruben Amorim's sort of tactical, I'd say, flaws so far. For example, playing Bruno in midfield, playing against Brentford, Maguire as the last man. I think he's lost some games at some point. I think if you got performance, so let's start with performance, which I think in some ways is positive for United. They lost to Arsenal, but they showed a good performance. They drew to Fulham, but they probably should have won. So straight away, I think they should have picked up at least, I'd say, another 3 points. Then they won against Burnley. I think that was a completely fair result. Then didn't deserve anything against City. Chelsea, I mean, they were down to 10 men, but it was still a decent... In fact, it wasn't actually a great performance in United. I'm going to say it should have probably been nothing. Then they lost to Brentford, and then they won against Sunderland. So I think their performances, I think they could have maybe, based off their performances, earned a couple more points so far this season. But what could have United done differently? Well, the other issue they've had is obviously, as I said, Ruben Amorim's flaws, but also losing to Grimsby really doesn't help Manchester United's season so far. I think it's fair to say. And I think in this sort of circumstance, you have to take this into account because it's an unacceptable result in a competition where United could have really targeted the season. And I think Ruben Amorim should be very disappointed that they're out of that so early. And I think that definitely marks down Manchester United to, I think for performance, I would probably put them so far as a C because I think I've liked what I've seen from them at points. I think for results, though, they're a D, basically for the Grimsby game. If they didn't lose the Grimsby game, I think there's an argument for a C, but I'm going to give them a D for now overall for Manchester United. So, on to Newcastle United, and I think it's fair to say this isn't the start that Eddie Howe would have wanted. Results, I mean, not great start. Look, they didn't get a win in their first three in games like you could have seen them definitely getting a win away at Leeds. I think Liverpool's harsh, and maybe I think a draw against Villa's not bad. Then they got their first win against Wolves. Then they lost to Bournemouth. They drew to Bournemouth. Sorry, they lost to Arsenal, and then they won against Nottingham Forest, which you would expect them to do. I think straight away results, I think you're looking at a D because I think there's still signs. They've got some decent results, but just not enough. I think the Champions League results aren't that bad. They lost to Barcelona 2-1, but I think that's to an extent expected. But then they smashed Union Saint-Gilloise 4-0. So I think they can get it. I think they can earn a D. It's not quite an E, I don't think. Performance. I look at these performances and I see a lot of good performances. I think away at Villa was good. I think the Liverpool game was good. I think the Leeds wasn't good. I think Wolves was decent. I think Bournemouth was not great again. In fact, they probably deserved to lose that. Arsenal wasn't great, and then Forest was good. Barcelona and Union Saint-Gilloise I also thought were quite good. So I think for performance, they probably once again are at a D. They needed to show another good performance in one of those away games to Leeds and Bournemouth to push to a C, in my opinion. Those are games that Newcastle United should be winning, in my opinion, or at least showing a better account than 0-0 draws. So they're going to land in D for now, but I fully expect these to move up a lot. So on to Nottingham Forest, and I'd say these are probably the easiest E out of the lot. There's also another couple of clubs that are quite easy that are coming up, but these are such an easy E. And that is purely off the fact that they set quite high expectations at the start of the season. I think Nuno's side could have finished top half. I think they showed some promise, and then they sacked him, and then they got Ange Postecoglou in. That's the simple way to sum up why they're playing so badly. First two results, you're saying pretty good performances, not bad results. Then you're looking at the West Ham game, shocking. Arsenal, I mean, it's Arsenal, so I'll let them off a bit. Burnley, shocking. Sunderland, shocking. Newcastle, not good enough. Europa League, Real Betis, alright result, I'll give them that. And Midtjylland, very poor result for Newcastle, and then losing to Swansea in the cup. Results, shocking. Results, E, because there were so many games in there that they should have won, and they also are completely at fault for themselves for why they've lost those games. So on to Nottingham Forest, and I'd say these are probably the easiest E out of the lot. There's also another couple of clubs that are quite easy that are coming up, but these are such an easy E. And that is purely off the fact that they set quite high expectations at the start of the season. I think Nuno's side could have finished top half. I think they showed some promise, and then they sacked him, and then they got Ange Postecoglou in. That's the simple way to sum up why they're playing so badly. First two results, you're saying pretty good performances, not bad results. Then you're looking at the West Ham game, shocking. Arsenal, I mean, it's Arsenal, so I'll let them off a bit. Burnley, shocking. Sunderland, shocking. Newcastle, not good enough. Europa League, Real Betis, alright result, I'll give them that. And Midtjylland, very poor result for Newcastle, and then losing to Swansea in the cup. Results, shocking. Results, E, because there were so many games in there that they should have won, and they also are completely at fault for themselves for why they've lost those games. performances haven't been good enough as well. First couple of games, decent performances, but once again, that is under Nuno. Even their loss to West Ham was shocking, actually, under Nuno. But then the next lot have been absolute crap, apart from Real Betis. That's such a large percentage for a side that was actually so successful last season, and the fans had expectations that they could definitely, I think, push into the European places, but they have appointed Ange Postecoglou. It's really that simple when it comes down to Nottingham Forest, and that is why this is going to be the simplest E of all time, I think. Really is. It's just so easy to slap Nottingham Forest in E, because that's where you deserve to go. On to another extreme, and this time it's Sunderland. Sunderland are nowhere near E, and I'll tell you why. They have picked up some huge points. Look, their game away at Burnley wasn't great, but apart from that, they have basically overperformed in every fixture, apart from, you can maybe argue, Manchester United. But if you look at this, they've won three games so far this season, including a win away at Forest, a win against Brentford, and a win against West Ham. I think wins that people didn't see coming. They've also picked up some great draws away at Crystal Palace, away at a draw against Aston Villa when no one expected. Reggie Labrise continues to defy expectations. The Manchester United game, you can let them off. It's a tough away game at the end of the day. And I think the Burnley game, considering the other results, you can also let them off. But at the end of the day, Sunderland are comfortably above safety right now. They've got 11 points on the board. They look like a side that can 100% stay up, and they are doing way better than Leeds, who I literally put a B. This is the easiest AI. This is one of the easiest A's. It really is, because their performances are so much better than a relegation side, and their results are also so much better than anybody expected. So the only fair decision with a team like Sunderland is to slap them into A. On to Spurs, and they've had a pretty good start to the season once again for Spurs. They have, I think, improved in the games where you would expect them to win. Still not to the extent where I think you'd be happy with, but a lot better than under Ange. If you look at those games, this is where Spurs, in my opinion, struggled last year. Those Burnley games, those games against West Ham, the games against Leeds. There's still games like that where they need to improve. For example, the Bournemouth game, they need to be picked up more than a loss, that's for sure. The Wolves game, they should be winning. But I think in general, you can be happy with Spurs' results so far. They've got a very good win away at Manchester City. They've looked good. They've got a draw against Brighton. So I think for performance, you're looking looking at a B. They also did pretty well in the Europa League. They drew away at Bodo, which I don't think is a great result, but then they won against Villarreal at home. So I think a B's are fair for Spurs. They're also in third place, which is a lot higher than I think people expected. I think in terms of how they've actually been performing and playing, I think there's a very good signs under Thomas Frank. They have struggled in a couple of games, but against, for example, Brighton, where they looked like they weren't going to get anything from it, they showed great team spirit. They managed to get back into the game, and I thought Spurs deserved that point. And I think Spurs overall have shown some good performances away at Manchester City. Now, they haven't had the best performances in some games. Wolves at home, Bodo away. But I think Spurs overall have showed a lot of promise this season, a side that could definitely finish in top four, which I don't think many people had them in. So for that reason, I'm going to slap Spurs into B, because I think their performances were also a B. On to West Ham, and as I said, Forest were a guaranteed E. These are even more a guaranteed E, to be honest, because their performances in general have been crap. It's that simple. I can name here, I think, 2 good performances so far this season, and one, I think, against Forest and one against Everton, but it's really not been enough, because all the other ones have been pretty much hopeless, and Arsenal, they were alright as well, actually, under Nuno, but the other ones have been terrible. And who's to blame there? Graham Potter. I don't actually think this is too much many else's fault. The signings aren't, the players they have aren't great, but Graham Potter's definitely impacted West Ham's season so far. These are very much an easy E, unfortunately, for West Ham fans, and I think most West Ham fans would agree that their results haven't been good enough, as well as performance. They're 19th in the Premier League. They look like a side that's going to be very much dragged into the relegation battle. They're behind the likes of Burnley. Unfortunately for you Hammers, I just can't look past any. Finally, Wolverhampton Wanderers, and unfortunately for you Wolves fans, another E is here, because look, they lost their first 5 games, then they drew the next 2. Their performances haven't been as bad as I think people are making out. They've had some signs of a side that can maybe play some football. I think away at Newcastle they're alright. I think away at Spurs they're alright. Against Brighton they did get bailed out by their keeper, but they still managed to pick up a point. But I think it's fair to say performances are still probably at an E. I think Wolves can show some fight at some point, but they have to invest heavily in January, and there's some signs that they're maybe under some financial pressure to do this, and if they are, then that could send Wolves very much down. And I think the fact that they're in the relegation zone, their 20th, makes this the easiest E. Really, their performance, their results just aren't good enough. It's that simple. And the fact that Sunderland are playing so well means that Wolves very much are a threat of going down in this Premier League. So here is the final ranking. If you enjoy this video, it'd be great if you could head over to the YouTube channel and subscribe. It'd also be great if you could let me know what your thoughts are on this video. Did you enjoy it? And of course, let me know, did you agree with my ranking? And if you didn't, where did you disagree?